Hello and welcome back. We're going to dive deeper into the Missouri Valley Conference as a whole. There are only two series this weekend going forward in the Valley. I believe Drake plays Evansville, I want to say. Or they could be wrong. Let me double
Uh,
check
uh,
here.
Day.
Yeah, Drake plays Evansville, and then Valpo and Southern Illinois go head to head Sunday and Monday. Those are the only two series this weekend for the Valley before they wrap up next week. The Valley has really taken shape. They got what they needed last weekend when Drake and Loyola split the series, kept both teams in contention for an at large. Really got what they needed. The only one downside was the first game. Loyola kind of handed it to Drake, so that hurt Drake a little more. But they're still on that bubble line, still in as of right now. So they got what they needed, and Missouri State has slowly reeled together a string of wins, and they're getting hot going into the tournament. And here's a little fact for you. If Missouri State won out in the tournament and got into the NCAA, you could potentially have three teams from the Valley in the tournament. Not only that, it'd be the fourth straight year three teams in the Valley have 20 plus wins. This is coming in a shortened season as well. Of course, the last 3 years, Bradley has been a part of that. We've hit on their lows this year, but still, ever since Wichita's left the conference for better competition, quote, we've produced three teams with 20 plus wins. And I think that's a positive spot, not only for those programs that are a part of it, but also the Valley as a whole. Shows the competition is holding, shows it's still very competitive top to bottom. And I just want to get your takes on how the Valley season has played out so far, what you're looking for in this last week and a half or so, and then going into Arch Madness.
Yeah, I think the first place you start is how well Drake and Loyola have played. I mean, they've generated national buzz. I think people I think people are talking about the Valley getting both teams in. I think there's a possibility Drake still gets in if they don't win the tournament. But I think they definitely would have to make it to probably the championship game. Um, so that's my first takeaway. I think that this is it's good for the Valley to get this recognition. Next take I had is first off, it's still not impossible for Bradley to avoid playing on Thursday. Just want to throw that out there. I don't think they can get. I think that the fifth seed is the highest they can go. Um, that's even with I think splitting with Drake. But um, another thing I with the Valley it stands out is Evansville is in fifth place and Valpo is in sixth place. Obviously, it you when you factor in Bradley not living up to their expectations and Northern Iowa with Green being out changes things, but you're talking about Evansville, who's been the doormat of the conference. Was it just last year they didn't win a conference game? Um, they're midway through the pack, and um, they can't get any higher, but there's a chance they have the fifth seed and can be playing on Saturday in St. Louis. Um, and then you look at Valpo. I mean, they went toe to toe at Loyola the other night. They lost two seniors and then Freeman Liberty, and I think myself included, people were kind of wondering how they were going to uh, those minutes, those points, how they were going to adapt. Defense has really been their calling card this year. So there's a chance that in like two teams playing on Friday that are Evansville and Valpo, and they didn't play on Thursday. And I think that is very, very surprising. Um, and I mean, really just looking at the Valley, I think in general, I think you have two really good teams in Drake and Loyola. I think you have two teams that can beat anybody on any given night in Missouri State and Indiana State. And then I think I think those four teams, if those four teams are playing on Saturday, you're going to have two really, really good games. Um, and I think the Valley tournament's going to be fun this year. I think it's, I mean, it's going to suck. Bradley's not going to probably do fare too well, but I think it's got a chance to be just some really good basketball because the Valley's competitive this year.
Yes, I agree with you there. I think it'll be very good basketball. I think in the last few years we've seen quite a few upsets because, injuries, things like that have happened down the stretch for some of the better teams. Some teams like Bradley get hot towards the end. I'm not sure how many upsets we'll see in St. Louis, but I do think we'll see a lot of good basketball because even the teams that you didn't mention there, like you mentioned, Valpo's been pretty competitive in some of these games against the top tier competition in Drake and Loyola. Illinois State's fared better than we thought in some of these games. Bradley's fared pretty well in some of these games. Evansville as well. So I think all these games are still going to be competitive and they're going to have good basketball down in St. Louis. And I think this is only the beginning, in my mind, for the Valley, because if you look at a lot of these teams, they are on the younger side or they are returning a lot. Missouri State, Gage Prem just announced last week that he's coming back next year using that extra year of eligibility. I got to imagine AJ Green will be back for UNI. Loyola is really one of the only teams that might lose a lot. But outside of that, you look around the Valley, there's a lot of young teams, there's a lot of good young talent. Drake might lose a couple guys, but they also might have some back because of that extra year of eligibility. So there could be, I think this could set up for next year, not only having maybe two bids this year, but next year being even more competitive than this year and carrying that momentum from this year into next year to trying to get back to where they are consistently a multi-bid league.
Yeah, I mean, talking about St. Louis, I think the team you don't want to play down there first game is going to be Valpo just because of the way they play defensive half court 50-point game. Um, I think that would be a tough first draw. But kind of going on what you're talking about next year, yeah, there's a lot of young talent in the Valley. It'd be interesting to see how many guys and what guys take advantage of that extra year. Um, I think best case scenario for the Bradley for Val or for sorry the Valley, other than potentially getting three teams in, would be to get two teams in, Drake and Loyola, and have each of them win a game. Because then you go into next year, Valley's got a little bit of confidence, a little bit of, hey, we got two teams in and we're going to be better next year. When you look at Missouri State's going to return a lot, even Loyola is probably going to lose the most, assuming players don't use the 6 year of eligibility. But with the style they play, it obviously losing Crutwig will be they'll have to adapt, but they play a style that they can replace. And then you have Drake, who's probably going to be, in my mind, the preseason number one this year. If they go to the tournament this year, they will be the preseason number one this year because of the DeVries kid that they're bringing in, the coach's son, who is going to be a problem in the league. And then you have potentially AJ Green coming back with Northern Iowa and Southern Illinois, a young team going to get better. Illinois State, young team getting better. Bradley, young team getting better. Like, if all of that happens in the tournament this year, you set up next year 6 teams at the beginning of the year. You say this team can make the NCAA tournament. This team can make the NCAA tournament. And I think I'm not comparing the Valley to the Big 10 or the Big 12 or a major conference like that, but what those conferences are good from top to almost the bottom.
Mm.
And they eat each other up, they beat each other up, and then at the end of the year, they have 3 or 4 teams that are in the Sweet 16 because they are battle tested and proven. And the Valley is like that every year, but being a one bid league, it's hard to prove that.
Yeah.
Next year you have that same thing, but maybe you get 3 teams in because you have 3 teams in the top 50 or 60 of the net rankings, and you were able to prove the Valley is a very, very tough league to win in. And it could be really, really good for the next couple of years, seeing multiple teams go to the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I mean, I've grown up around the Valley because I used to always go to the Valley tournament here in St. Louis, and I remember the mid to late 2000s when the Valley would get 3, 4 teams in consistently. They'd send at least one team to the Sweet 16, whether it was SIU, whether it was Bradley, whether it was
Well, you think
Drake.
about until Bradley losing to Michigan State, who they almost beat, the Valley won a game every year in the first round for
Mhm.
like 7 or 8 years. So you
Right,
have a team. You're one of the only mid-major schools to win a game every single year in the tournament.
yeah,
And that I think talks a lot about how good the Valley is because you have one team in and one team is winning. Um, obviously having Wichita State and Creighton those first couple years of that run helped, but I mean, it's still impressive to see what the Valley has done the last few years without those teams.
right, and that's what I was kind of building on is, since Wichita State's left, they've had, I mentioned, they've almost had 3 teams have 20 wins every single year. And so that just talks about the consistency, how good the basketball it really is here. It's not always the prettiest, but they play hard. They always competitive. And what I could see, you were talking about the Big 10, Big 12. What I could see the Valley being next year is similar to what the Mountain West is this year for mid majors. They're talking about potential 4 teams from the Mountain West getting in this year because it's so competitive. And I know it's more the top, but at their 5th spot is Nevada, a team who's won 6 straight there. And you've got UNLV in the 6th seed right now in the Mountain West, who has been competitive in other years. They've got a proven coach from South Dakota State.
Joe.
Yep. So they've got, a lot of competitiveness in that conference. And I could easily see the Valley becoming that type of mid major conference next year with all this talent that we have. And not only that, the talent that's coming in next year, like you mentioned with Drake and Bradley's got talent as well. And Loyola, again, I said they're gonna probably lose the most, but they also are probably the deepest team right now, and they're also getting players in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look around at some of the other conferences, and obviously we are more knowledgeable about the Valley, but you look at some of the other mid-major conferences that are similar to Bradley. I mean, excuse me, similar to the Valley. Like the Valley is probably the best true mid-major conference in the country. Then you bring in conferences like Conference USA. Uh, you bring in like the MAC. You bring in what was the other one I was looking at? Even the American. Like the Valley in my mind is better than the MAC and is better than the Conference USA. And I would put them right up there toe to toe with the A10. I'd put them right up there toe to toe, maybe not quite with the American, but I think if Houston and Wichita State this year have kind of separated themselves in that conference, but I like is it's not crazy to think that Loyola couldn't hang with Memphis, SMU, Cincinnati. Those are the other 3 schools in the top 5 in that conference, or Drake couldn't, or even Missouri State couldn't. And those are like the in between, in my mind, mid major and Power 5 conferences. And the Valley in my eyes is right up there with them. And I think that's a very, very telling thing when you're looking at which of these schools are going to get those bubble bids into the league. And Cincinnati is in the American, but are they really better than Drake? It's like if they're fighting for a bubble spot, no, Drake is better. Drake's better than SMU, and in my opinion, Drake is better than Memphis
Mhm.
right now. So, like, you look at these bigger conferences and you say they may be in a better conference, but you look at what these like Valley teams have done, and the net rankings speak for them on that behalf as well.
Yeah, and going into what you're talking about there, the different conferences, I think it speaks volumes that Bradley, yes, they've kind of downplayed, but they beat Toledo earlier in the year. And look at where Bradley is in the Valley versus look where Toledo is in the
Yeah,
MAC. I think that's a perfect example there to show where the Valley really is at. And
mhm.
then you look, I think it was Loyola played Richmond and some of those crossovers. I think right now, this year, I would say we're a step behind the A10. And I'd say we're on par more with the American just because there is that disparity between Houston and pretty much everybody else. I know Wichita State just won, but there's still a big disparity between those two teams. So I think we're closer to the American this year than people realize. And it's just unfortunate that we didn't really have the non-conference to really showcase what could have been and the Valley as a whole could be.
Yeah. I mean, but I think you look at the games that have been played. Did Loyola beat Richmond, or they just kind of hang around with them?
I think
'Cause
they
I know Loyola and you and I played Richmond when Richmond was ranked,
so
and both
yeah,
hung.
you and I hung around, got beat a little worse, I think, late. And I think Loyola barely lost by like 2 or 3 points.
But then but then they went to Wisconsin and didn't exactly get, thumped. I mean, they lost, but they didn't, it was a competitive game. Drake, even though they beat, even though Kansas State's not good, Drake beat Kansas State early on. And you can't, like, don't even overlook the fact, like, Bradley almost beat Xavier, beat Toledo. No, SIU beat Butler at the beginning of the year. Like, the Valley has some decent non-conference wins by multiple members of the conference, and I think when you look at them top to bottom, it shows how good the Valley is in terms of preparing and scouting and coaching, because, like, you look at these teams, they're playing better competition. Kansas State is supposed to be better than Drake every single
Mhm.
year, and it shows how good of a coaching Drake has to beat Kansas State by like 8 or 9 and lead the entire game. I mean, that's a well prepared team, and that's why they win a game every year in the tournament. Is because they are always, every team in the Valley is always well prepared for the most part.
Right. I agree with you there. And that's what makes some of these games so competitive. And that's why when we say it's competitive top to bottom, people who don't really follow the Valley will kind of roll their eyes like, oh, whatever. Bradley's like 5-11. They're not competitive. But when you watch the games, they are very competitive late down into the games. And, that's why you have these games like Loyola taking on Valpo the other day, where it comes down to the wire and it's, a bad call or a foul here, and Loyola sneaks away with the win versus if that call or something happens that goes Valpo's way, they come out with an upset. And it's a team that you don't really necessarily expect to win that game. But that's just the nature of the Valley. It's always competitive no matter who you're playing, no matter who you are or how good you are. And I
So,
think,
Scott,
yeah, and I
great.
think it's only just going to get better. Like I mentioned, I think next year it could be the best group of teams or conference as a whole that we've seen in quite some time from the Valley.
I think the biggest thing to the Valley's success next year, there's two big things. We've already hit on the one, playing well in the tournament and stuff like
Mhm.
that. The next biggest thing is every coach has to come back next year.
Yes.
Um, there's talks. I mean, however much you want to read into them, if they're just fans generating them, but there's talks. Porter Moser's getting
Mhm.
looks, and I wouldn't be surprised if DeVries gets some looks. And I don't think Dana Ford is going anywhere, but you look, Ben Jacobson's not going anywhere, but like, maybe a team looks at some of those coaches and kind of says, be tough to turn if you're if you're DeVries, it'd be tough to turn down a couple $1 million a year to go coach at a Power Five school. So I think that's the other big thing too is these teams are very very well coached,
Mhm.
and every coach in this league, I think, has had success and or has proven they can coach with the best of them, and that's I think another big key to them to the Valley being good next year, because it's a very very competitive league, and those little edges you get with coaching matter.
Yeah, and if you look at the coaching trees and things like that, and you look at some of the better coaches around the country, a lot of them have ties to the Valley. A lot of them start out in the Valley. I mean, you've got Dana Altman out in Oregon. He started out in the Valley. You've got all these big names that come from here. So it's hard as a Valley fan to see some of them go, but you do understand and appreciate these guys because you see how good they are as a coach before anybody else, and kind of it's cool to see somebody start out in the Valley and then have success somewhere else still.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean it's always it seems like there's a lot of when you're watching national games or something, it seems like there's always one reference sometimes to the Valley of
Mhm.
this coach went to school at the Valley or in a Valley school or coached at a Valley school. Um, it is you. Dana Altman, I think, is kind of the poster child for it because he was very successful in the Valley. Um, but I mean, there's a lot of history there, and the coaching tree. If you can coach in the Valley, I mean, it's you can coach at a Power Five school.
Mhm.
And in my opinion, and coaches have proved that.
Yeah, I agree with you there. We'll take a quick break and we'll get back. And I've got some questions for you about the whole landscape of college basketball, and we'll get into it.
All right.